Well, I am excited this afternoon to talk to Dan Shornhurst. Dan is camp director at Bear Creek Camp in northeastern Pennsylvania. And Dan, it's a delight to have you on today.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here with you.
So my kids, since the time they were very little, have been going to Bear Creek Camp. And last summer we picked up our younger son who was at camp, and Dan made the comment that it was the best summer the camp had ever had. And that really excited me. And so I contacted Dan and said, Dan, is there anything from what you've experienced at Bear Creek Camp that would apply to church leaders? And Dan said yes. And I said, let's set up an interview. I want to hear about that. So, Dan, tell us more about that.
Well, the first thing I'm going to tell you, Stuart, is that when you come and get your kids this summer, this will also be the best summer ever. You know, we just kind of keep that going. So
Awesome.
yeah, that's always the goal. But it honestly has been true. This will be my sixth summer at Bear Creek Camp, and I'm hoping and praying that it is indeed going to be the best one ever. But they've been getting better and better, and there's a lot of reasons for that. And I think a lot of tools or a lot of things about what we do at summer camp can certainly be duplicated in congregations as well. The things that we've seen be successful, I think, can be duplicated in any ministry setting, and we're happy to share as much as we can with whoever would like to listen, to strengthen our churches and strengthen the ministry as a whole.
Awesome.
But yeah, so to begin, I think honestly, we've identified, and there's been some camp research going on, but we've identified really 5 areas that make summer camp work in our setting, and it's certainly something that can be duplicated. But the 5 really big things we found, and if one of these breaks down, it kind of messes up the whole thing. But we found that camp is a relational place, camp is hands-on, camp is Christ-centered, it's safe, and it's different from home. And those things we've been able to tap into and have been identified as the biggest reasons that camps are successful. And certainly some of these can be used in congregations or wherever. But we start with relational, and that's been a big focus of mine from my earliest days of, dipping my toes into any kind of ministry setting. It's always been shared with me that the number one powerful tool that we have that God has given us is the ability to be relational. And we preach that to our counselors and anybody on our staff, that we need to be about our campers that come, our guests that come. We build relationships with them through games, songs, skits, whatever it might be, even just discussions and hanging out together. We know that the Spirit is at work in the powerful relationships that are formed at camp. Over and over and over again, our campers and parents tell us that their favorite thing about camp was their counselor. And it's not because their counselor can juggle or do weird things, which, summer camp counselors certainly can. But it boils down to that relationship that's built between the counselor and the campers. The counselor's taking time to spend with kids, to listen to them, to hang out with them, to ask them questions, to get interested in their life. And it's obviously a complete ripoff of what Jesus did with his disciples. Jesus choosing to spend time with the disciples and the other people that were with him was a very, very powerful tool. And we've used that here and have found it to be probably the number one most successful thing. And so I've been in a lot of discussions with pastors and youth director kind of people or adult leaders, and everybody wants to know the secret sauce and what makes, youth ministry great or congregational ministry or whatever. And honestly, to me, and what I've seen in my, 20 some summers at working at camp is honestly the best thing. No matter what games we do, no matter what activities go on, nothing trumps the great relationships that are built. Nothing does more impact or makes a bigger difference in a camper's life than the relationships built. And so if I was passing this along to congregations, and when I do get in those discussions, it always boils down to, are you building relationships with kids? Because that's the only thing, not the only thing, but that's probably the most impactful tool that you have. And anybody can do that. Any youth group, any church, you've got people build relationships with kids. That's what makes a long-term impact. And so that's been our number one thing. And when I talk to people about youth ministry in their congregations, that's where I go. Do you have adults or folks that are willing to spend time with kids and get to know them? My wife was a youth director at a couple of different churches for over 12 years, and she wasn't big on summer fun trips or the ski trip. That wasn't her ministry. Her ministry was spending time with kids, and she saw great success in that. And so that's the number one thing. Relationships. How's that? Does that sound good, Stuart? Does that work for you?
Absolutely. I think that's, as you were talking, I was thinking, and I've been saying this about church, especially because so much of our life is online, that church and congregations is a place where you get to know people face to face. You're with them in a way that a lot of our other Facebook and other stuff relationships are, that they're less real. They're certainly less face to face and less relational.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find it in my own congregation that we attend now. There are weekends I don't feel like going or I don't want to go, but then I start thinking about, and maybe this is wrong, I start thinking about the people that are going to be there and people I haven't connected with in a couple of weeks, and I want to do that. And I think God is at work in that. And I think God so many times has shown me, Dan, you're at worship not just for yourself, but you're there for other people. You're there obviously to hear the word, to be fed, to be spiritually nourished, etc. But I think so much happens in just the relationships, and I often leave impacted and fulfilled and encouraged, not just by what God has said, but what God has in the worship service, but what God has said through other people to me, which is really cool. But anyway, that's honestly our biggest focus here is just on relationship building. And we don't hire counselors anymore that aren't interested in building relationships with kids. That's what we need to be about. So that's where we start.
Okay.
Another one, I'll just go down the list, hands-on. Now that's a little bit different, just from situation to situation. But for us, one of our keys to success is that camp is participatory. And honestly, churches can do this too, just depending on what's going on. And actually, the more I think about it, there's a lot of ways to plug kids in to worship and things like that. But here, obviously at camp, we don't just show kids stuff, they get to do things. And that goes back 100 years in camping. Kids don't come to camp just to watch counselors do stuff, but they get to be involved, and that's really cool. But what we've been encouraging our congregations in is to identify when our kids come back from camp, to identify those kids as they leave camp really fired up. And when they're back in their congregations in the summertime or in the fall, I've been encouraging our pastors, find those kids that have gone to camp, because they're usually pretty jacked up when they come home, and get them involved, whether it's in worship or other activities that are going on. Is there a place for them? Is there a place where they can be involved? Because I've heard campers say, "Oh, my church or worship at our church is so boring," and that kind of thing. But I think if we find ways or look for ways to involve young people in our worship services, that could be another tool that could be used. Now, that's not a new idea. As you'll learn as I talk, we don't have a lot of brand new ideas, but we've found these things to be tried and true. But here at camp, it's easy to get campers involved, and it might be a little more challenging in the life of your congregation. But I think it's a good place to look and to see and provide opportunities for kids that not just the ones that have been to camp, but other young folks as well. How can we get them plugged into worship services, and how can we get them plugged in at different places so that they feel too like they're involved and that they're a part of it? My own kids, 9 and 10 years old at home, have been able to do things at our home congregation, which is cool. They help with communion, they help with other things, and they really get excited about that. They really feel like they're a part of it, and they're a bigger part of the life of the congregation, which is really cool. So we've seen that work, and that's been awesome. Another thing, as I mentioned, Christ-centered. Obviously, that in the life of the church, it's good to be Christ-centered,
of course.
Yeah, isn't that great? Now that's a brand new idea. We
Yeah.
we came up with that on our own. Um, Clearly, just kidding. But that's what we found too has been a really big deal in this day and age, where I think a lot of places perhaps are shying away a little bit. Well, we don't want to offend anyone, and we're not here to offend people. We're not here to make people mad. We're here to share that with them the truth, and the truth that we know is God's gift of Christ on the cross and resurrected on Easter Day. And we share that in the way we treat people. We share that in the way we interact, in the way we lift people up and encourage them. And obviously, we can go on, and your congregations are probably as good at this as anywhere, but remaining focused on what's really, really good. And there's nothing better than the gospel. And so we build everything on that. And that, congregations know how to do that. So I don't know that there's a lot I can say as far as that goes, but certainly that's been another key element to what we do here. And the reason, I mentioned last summer that it was our best summer ever, as we found more and more summer staff that that are serious about their relationship with Christ, that are a little more mature in their relationship, or at least have a good foundation. They've been raised in the church, or they've been raised with faithful parents. Then it's easier to tap into. And we had more and more of those folks last summer than we've ever had. And you can see that in the course of the week. You can see that in how they treat their campers and et cetera. And I think that really translates well to congregations. Another one is we do our very best. Now this is probably our newest focus area, and something that's gone really well. But we provide a safe place, and that's something that our campers and parents really appreciate. That when a camper comes here, they can be true to themselves and true to who they are. We have campers that come that are struggling with any number of issues that you could ever dream of across the spectrum of humankind. But we want to create a place here where no matter what they are or who they are, they're able to share that with counselors to whatever degree they want to share. We're not twisting anybody's arm, but that they'll know they'll be accepted, they'll be loved, and they'll be welcomed, regardless of whatever they're struggling with or whatever they're considering, or however that goes. Now, that's something, too, that I think churches have done an outstanding job of creating those safe spaces. Clearly, every church needs to work on this, and at camp here, we can get way better at this. But creating a safe space has opened up the doors to a lot of incredible conversations and a lot of lifetime change in our campers and in our summer staff as well. And as congregations, as they do this as well, you'll see the difference it makes. You'll see the impact that it has. But allowing people to be who they are, knowing we're all made in God's image, and allowing them to express that, or to question, or to struggle, or to talk about those things, whatever it might be, giving them sort of that no judgment zone, to steal a phrase from the gym. I can't even think of it, but the no judgment zone. We try to do that.
Planet Fitness.
Planet Fitness, exactly. It's Planet Fitness. It slipped my mind, but we steal that from them. Like, this is the no judgment zone. It needs to be, because we want kids to come here and be comfortable and to talk about whatever things they want to talk about. But that's something too that honestly, I think a lot of churches have led the way in that. And so congregations, we look to you, for leadership in that area as well. That as folks grow up in that environment, it's easier for them to then share that with others too. But we create a different space, so that's kind of cool, or safe space, and so that's kind of cool, and has been really neat and very appreciated, I will say, by campers and parents themselves. That we've had kids come back and say, you know what, I was struggling with this and this and this, and I was able to talk to my counselor a little bit, and I wasn't judged, I wasn't treated differently. And I think sometimes campers come here or I've even talked to parents who've called beforehand to say, my camper doesn't really we never go to church, we're not involved, will they be, treated differently, or will they be behind? And of course not. Of course, we're going to treat all our campers the same, regardless of their church background, certainly. But they'll experience what other campers experience here, and it may be new to them, it may be old to them, but certainly they'll be treated and loved just as if, they were the camper's been here 100 times or what have you. So And then lastly, as I go through my list here, different from home. And that's something I don't know how well that translates with congregational ministry, but certainly a little bit. But I think for us, the benefit of that is just we're a different place. And so when campers are around different people, it just sometimes the message strikes them differently. I tell pastors all the time, I don't think the message we have here is not unique. It's very similar to the message they hear in worship every week, which is the gospel, obviously. But I think what we have going for us is just we're a different voice, and sometimes that's what it takes. I know as a parent, I've said to my kid, I can tell them the same thing 100 times, and as soon as they come to camp and their counselor tells them, the same thing once, it's like this golden message that they've just gotten. And so that I don't know if that one translates as well. But it really boils down to just some of the other things, creating a place that's welcoming and Christ-centered and et cetera. But just we're in a different environment, and so that happens. Now with congregations, they kind of pull that off by, youth retreats or weekends or things, or even with adults, where you're in a different place, a different setting. Sometimes that makes a big difference. But as I look at it from a congregational side, I mean, you got to do what you can to kind of shake things up a little bit and maybe take a trip with people or do whatever, but getting them in a different environment sometimes opens up doors that weren't able to be open prior to that. But anyway, so that's, one of the things. But those are really the 5 biggest things, Stuart, that we see that have worked. And this is, these were identified by a group that's doing some research on summer camp, Lutheran summer camp in particular. And it certainly resonated with us and something we've been focusing on.
Excellent. Well, I think part of it too is just even that intentionality of finding what's important and then pouring that extra effort into that. There's a great intentionality to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Once they were identified, it was like, oh yeah, these are the things we've been doing. We just haven't named them. And now that we have this list and we know these are the areas, and what was interesting too is in the research they found that if one of those areas isn't up to speed, then it kind of the whole circle suffers. If we're not relational, then it kind of doesn't matter what the rest of the things are because it'll be weaker. But we found that if all these 5 areas are strong, it creates a stronger summer camp program and all the way around. And congregations, it might vary a little bit here and there, but I think for the most part, there's some things in that congregations already do really well, but maybe something to look at or focus on.
For sure. Well, even the last one you mentioned, different than home, one of my favorite small groups was a group of guys that met in a microbrewery, and
Oh, right.
just a different setting, and we related to each other differently than we might have in a back room of church.
Absolutely. Yeah. When I mentioned my wife being a youth director at that time, I was one of the small group leaders for some high school boys. And we never met at the church. We found another place, as coffee shop or an ice cream store or something. And it was incredible. The second I got him out of the church building and we sat down somewhere else, the conversations just rolled on. And it was just different from being at church. And it just made a huge difference. And the things we were able to discuss outside of the church building was really incredible and really impactful to me and hopefully to them. But but I tell you what, just that simple thing of just driving down the road 10 minutes, wham, it just changed the whole thing. So it made a big deal. At camp, it's nice because everybody's different. Everybody's away from home. But congregations, you got to just, what can I do? What's around here? But you're right. I tell you what, it makes a big difference.
Yep. And I think I think you're right, all 5 of these relate to and connect with a congregation if we can just think about how to focus on them and spend some time on them much more intentionally. It's a great list. I appreciate it, Dan.
Yeah, not a problem. Happy to help. We exist to share what we know. So many congregations have shared good things with us. So we just what we've learned, we want to share with other people. There's no secrets here.
Excellent. Well, again, I really appreciate your time today, Dan.
Yeah, not a problem, Stuart. My pleasure.
Take care. God bless.
Thank you. You as well. Have a good one.